Brady Tkachuk just got traded to the Florida Panthers in a blockbuster deal, but is that the last that we'll see this offseason or the first of many? We'll cover that and more in this review of what just happened in that big trade and what's going on with the NHL. So for Brady Tkachuk, he's the captain of the Ottawa Senators, or he was captain of the Ottawa Senators for the last 5 years, and there's been rumblings about him perhaps getting traded, even though Brady himself had been denying these rumors for a while, saying he was sick of it. That's a distraction. Now let's be clear, we never heard any grumblings or rumblings of Brady himself actually saying he wanted out initially. It's just the assumption has been made after what happened when Matthew Tkachuk asked for a trade out of Calgary when he said he would not re-sign with the Flames. So for Ottawa, the thought was, a lot of people were thinking that perhaps Brady will do the same thing. Now the thing with Matthew when he left Calgary was the fact that there was thought that he wanted to be captain of the Flames. I don't think that matters. Even if he got the captaincy with Calgary, eventually he would want it out. And that's the same thing with Brady. He's for a while said he enjoys Ottawa, he enjoys the city. But I think what happened is the dynamics have shifted quite a bit after the U.S. Olympic gold medal win. Because now the dynamic is going to be kind of similar to the NBA, where it looks like some of these players are going to force trades to destinations they want to go to. And in this case, there's a few different things. First off, the trade itself. Brady Tkachuk is not a superstar in the NHL. He's a really good player. He obviously has a name that carries. Matthews is the better of the two brothers. Yes, Brady was captain of Ottawa. Brady's had some good years. He's one of the true power forwards that's left in the league that will drop the gloves and fight, and he will give you like 2 to 3 hits a game, 3-4 shots a game, and close to being a point per game player in some seasons. But he is not going to be a threat for 100 points, I don't think, unless perhaps being on a team where he's surrounded by so many other talented players that he's able to kind of excel in a secondary role instead of being the guy in Ottawa as he was looked at for his whole tenure there. Now, for Brady, it's reuniting with Matthew is obviously a big thing, because for Florida, they can kind of, chase a cup together, and they wanted to play together. That's been something that's been known for years. Hence, a lot of people just made that assumption that in a couple of years, if Ottawa did not trade Brady, he would end up in Florida anyways. So from Florida's perspective, this is a no-brain move, but it's a little bit perplexing in a way as well, because Florida obviously had a bad year this year, and it had nothing to do with their play as much so as injuries. When Alexander Barkov, one of the best two-way centers, probably the best two-way center in the league, went down at the start of the year, before the season even began, things were thrown off. We also knew Matthew Tkachuk was going to miss a big chunk of the season, which he did. And then throughout the year, other players had a lot of nicks and bruises and missed some time. And then Brad Marchand got shut down. He went out. There's a lot of injuries that the Panthers dealt with. Not to mention that they've had 3 years of consecutive playoff runs that were really deep into June. So the amount of hockey that they played, the volume, and just in terms of how rough playoff hockey is compared to the regular season, and on top of that, just getting hit with the injury bug. Florida missing the playoffs was looked at as an outlier. It's not like all of a sudden everybody's like Florida's fallen off the map. On the contrary, the Panthers are going to be in the playoffs next year. Again, barring injury, they will be in the playoffs, and I get it. This move changes a lot of things, because number one, the thought was when Florida landed that bottom 10 pick, which was top 10 protected from that Seth Jones trade with Chicago, if it fell out of the top, out of the top 10, it would have gone to Chicago. But the fact that it stayed in the top 10th, 9th overall, made it easier to think that Florida would use that as a tradable asset. Because remember, the Panthers win now window is wide open right now. They have a lot of veterans on their team. They can be a contender for the next 3-4 years without doing anything except running with the core that they have. Of course, due to cap issues or any things that change over time, that's part of the cycle. They would have to adjust the lineup. But the core, unless they wanted to change it, would remain consistent. You would have Barkov there. You would have Tkachuk there. Seth Jones would still be there. Sam Reinhart is there. Anton Lundell is a part of that. You also have locked up Sam Bennett and Brad Marchand for a little bit longer. And so you already have the pieces to be a player, and being healthy, Florida is going to be one of the top teams in their division. So then the thought was that perhaps with Sergei Bobrovsky, they hadn't come to an agreement with him, and he's gonna have to take a pay cut from that $10 million. I get it. He's also a lot older. Has had a lot of wear and tear, and this last season was a brutal year. But the assumption was that just based on everything that Bob's done for them, they might bring him back. But it also is, it's also understandable where Bobrovsky's put up a great resume over his career, and especially over the last several years. Like, remember when he signed that contract with Florida, how much it was panned by everyone that it was such an overpayment, and eventually the first few years didn't go great, but then eventually, funny enough, towards the latter part of that contract, he paid it off and then some. So the thought was that Florida would use their pick to perhaps go after Dylan Larkin, whose name had come up in, obviously he said Florida is one of his destinations. Larkin to Florida did not make much sense because they really don't need him. And I don't think Florida was any rush to trade Anton Lundell in a deal for Larkin. I think a lot of people, what happens is a lot of fans will overvalue their own team's players and think they can get the move for them, not realizing how valuable some other pieces are and how they're looked at upon, in the league. Anton Lundell was never going to get moved for Larkin. In fact, Anton Lundell was a piece that GM Steve Staios of the Senators asked for, and he was also shut down by Bill Zito. So Lundell is Barkov light. He's perfect in terms of being a 2-3 for them right now. Obviously, eventually he can move on to be a top 6 center. But for now, they have no problem interchangeably moving him up between the second and third. And for him, he's probably fine with that role at the moment. It's not like he's upset about it. He's on a team that's contending and winning. So some players are willing to do that. The thing was, everybody thought that Florida would use that pick to trade to Winnipeg and try to perhaps get Connor Hellebuyck. It actually made a lot of sense because that would give Winnipeg 2 top 10 picks, enough to perhaps, they can also go for a different goalie and rejig their lines of landing a second line center in Tynan Lawrence, or if you go Bjork in the draft if possible, and just getting another defenseman, or perhaps really restock their cupboards quick. That made a lot more sense, and then this came out of the blue. And for that, it doesn't matter because Brady Tkachuk will still fit in with the Florida Panthers. It's not an issue for how the Panthers are built, because they are going to be by far one of the most annoying teams in the league to play with. Can you imagine with Brady Tkachuk there now, also Matthew already there, we already had Sam Bennett there, and Brad Marchand. Their top 3, the top 9, like the top 3 lines are unreal. They have skill, they have grit, they have a little bit of everything. Now, we don't know what the final product is going to look like come training camp, because this is still early in the offseason. And we don't know if Florida is going to decide to do what Carolina did and, cheap out and go the goaltending route of trying to find someone else to kind of do their job and just do enough, or are they going to look for a more prominent name in the goaltending market to upgrade there? They only have, at this point, $7 million in cap space after these moves. And so they still need to address, they don't have any goalies under contract. They will need to get a starter and a backup, so maybe they'll look at a tandem, it's possible. And so for Florida, they will, I have full confidence in Bill Zito. He's one of the best GMs in the league, that he will make some shrewd moves. There's a lot of confidence there with what he's done, because he's built that team magnificently. Every move he has pretty much made has worked out. And so, he'll make this work somehow, and Brady might amp up his game. He's signed for, a good cap hit for the next couple of years. I think it's 8.25 for 2 more years. And in Florida, that works out well. And so for the Panthers, they are going to be, again, barring crazy injuries, they're going to be back in the playoffs. They're not done by any means, and they are going to be a contender. They're not a playoff contender, they're a Stanley Cup contender. On the other hand, when you look at the Ottawa Senators, I commend them for being up front and doing this right away. Like, they were out in front of this and they got it done, because you knew this was going to happen, that eventually Brady's going to want out. And you don't want to be in a situation like Calgary was, where Matthew Tkachuk, was going to get walked right to with RFA, to free agency. Like, there's just, you need to address this sooner rather than later, and quietly they just went about and did it. Now, does this help Ottawa in the short term? Not at all. However, we also got to see until training camp how Ottawa does this, because Brady Tkachuk did not have a good playoff against Carolina. I know it was only 4 games, we got swept, but he put up a goose egg. He was not a factor in those playoffs. Last year against Toronto, sure, he had a better, playoff performance, but really, I think take away the name and him being a captain, I don't think Ottawa is, in as rough a shape as people think, because now Ottawa also has 3 first-round picks. They have the 9th overall, the 25th, which, by the way, to point out, Florida, this tells you how smart Zito was. He acquired that pick yesterday, the 25th overall pick from Seattle earlier in the day, where he ended up also moving Maki Samoskevich over to Seattle to get that pick, and then he flipped it a couple hours later to Ottawa. Now, they lost, a young player there, but they grabbed, Ottawa's got now the 9th to the 25th and also the 32nd, which was reinstated by the league. They can't flip the 32nd. Ottawa, what they could do is, again, they could turn around and package those picks and get something else in return. They need to address their winger situation, because they already were, down one top 6 winger, and now they're down another. And Drake Batherson is probably their only surefire guy that they could put on the wing on left or right if they need to. Down the middle, they got Stützle still there. They have Cousins. They have Shane Pinto. They could leverage one of those centers if they really want to. Like, they're one of those teams that actually has good depth down the middle and swing for a winger, or they can actually take their picks and perhaps come up with some sort of deal. Now, to me, one possible match for Ottawa, if they want to, and I guess it depends on what they want to do. Do they want to kind of retool, or do they want to trade these picks right away and go back all in? It's hard to say, because the Senators are also trying to compete for a playoff spot. They were built to be in the playoffs or fight for a playoff spot. They're not looking to rebuild. So I think they could take these picks and flip and get some more assets. Now, off the top of my head, one team that I think would be a good match for them is the Calgary Flames, because the Flames, yes, they also have a couple of first-round picks, but they're rebuilding. They also have a lot of wingers. Like, they don't have a lot of high-end players. Of course, that's, Flames are early in their rebuild stage, but they have a lot of serviceable wingers and some younger pieces that might not fit their timeline in terms of once they're competitive. So there could be a match there, because Calgary has a lot of wingers to move, that perhaps they can package up a few of their wingers to get one of those picks, and use a package where perhaps they get the 25th pick from Ottawa for moving a couple of guys and add in a second, because the Flames also have like 4 second-rounders. So they're actually a good match. The Flames are struggling with center depth, and I don't know if they'll try to address it through the draft. I guess it depends on who falls to them. Or they could go the trade route and try to trade for one of those guys off Ottawa, if Ottawa wants to do that. I mean, having depth down the middle is so important. You can always find wingers. But that's just something off the top of my head. Now, the other thing with this is what they got in return was the 9th, the 25th of this year's draft, which is, of course, this Friday. They also got a second-round pick and a conditional first round that's top 10 protected, which is for like 2029, which actually, yes, that's so far out, but it's not bad, because at that point, perhaps the Panthers, after a couple of years, are on the decline. You don't know. You don't know, because Zito has been such a shrewd GM that it might not be, as low of a pick as you think it's going to be in the standings, and therefore you drafting high. So that we'll have to see. The other thing that's an issue that you kind of have to look at is the Senators, moved a captain that was American. It seems like after that whole Olympic gold medal win, there's been a lot of talk, and it seems like more so the Team USA guys, right? There's talk about, Brady moving. Quinn Hughes was already traded. The rumblings around Austin Matthews in Toronto won't stop. One thing that Connor Hellebuck is the other one for Winnipeg in terms of him getting traded. And is this now becoming a league-wide issue? Maybe. Like, I at the same time, I don't think it's a bad thing for the league, because of trades are exciting. And I think this is the first domino. This is not the last domino to fall. I mean, Dylan Larkin is still on the market. Brady Tkachuk has a bigger name than Larkin for sure. I think Larkin overall is the better player, because he's a center and provides more for a team, I think, in terms of who's a better captain. I guess a lot of people might just hate on both of them, that they both suck because they wanted out. But we don't know the circumstances, and I don't want to try to address what's going on and what the rumors are, or is it just clearly they wanted out. For Brady, apparently he gave a list of 4 teams that he was willing to accept a trade to, which was the Florida Panthers, the Vegas Golden Knights, the Carolina Hurricanes, and the Minnesota Wild. Of course, the Canes and Knights just played for the Stanley Cup final, and Vegas is always a desirable destination for a lot of players. And then Minnesota, the Billy Guerin connection there is big. But, Brady, Minnesota made no sense. Larkin on Minnesota makes a lot of sense. Brady makes 0 sense. They already have Boldy and Caprell there. They don't need Brady. So I think the dynamic could shift a little bit, but I don't think it's true. There's some of these players that maybe it's just coincidence that they wanted. And the hard thing is, yes, is the NHL a player-driven league? No, it's not. It never has been. That's what the NBA has been for years. Could it be shifting that way? Perhaps. But the other thing to keep in mind is there's only so much some of these teams can do. If this was like baseball where there was no salary cap and you were like the Dodgers, yes, Vegas and Florida would probably load up on just to sign every star player that's available. The thing is, because of a hard salary cap, there is adjustments that need to be made by these teams, and they're not easy to do. So if you're trying to acquire a high-end player that wants to play on your team, you're going to have to clear cap space somehow. And if you're Vegas, sure, you could probably go out and get everybody as to become free agents because they're ruthless and you don't know what they're going to do. But for Florida, the whole no tax thing. But the other thing is the Panthers have, everybody forgets like before Barkov got drafted like 10 years ago. Don't forget Barkov, Ekblad, they were high-end picks for Florida. But the Panthers sucked. The Panthers were a trash organization. So it's not as simple as, people want to go play in Florida because it's a nice weather. Players weren't going there before, and back in the day when they had nobody and they weren't that good with like Valerie Burry and Christian Hoselias, when Roberto Luongo was there, like they weren't a good team. Zito has made it a prime destination to go because of you have a chance to win. So if you have a chance to live in hot, nice weather, not have to deal with the snow, and you get a chance to win, that is what's attractive to players. You see, for the NBA, there's certain markets that players want to go to. Yes, LA, with the Clippers. There's always those, Clippers, the Lakers. You have some of, Miami is always a desired destination. There's certain teams that players want to get traded to, but they're also willing to go to some teams that are winners, right? And so it's a little bit different in terms of, I don't think the players will be able to make moves as much as they would like to, because even NBA, there's a lot of more cap gymnastics, and NBA is probably the most confusing sport in terms of how their salary cap system works and their luxury tax system. It's just weird because there's so many different levels. There's on the second apron, first apron. I like the NHL. It's hard. It's easy to see what the ceiling is and what the floor is, and that's it. So with that being said, I think overall for this trade, Florida, based on what they're trying to do, they get an A- from me. The only reason I'm not giving them an A is I feel like if they made this similar kind of trade with Winnipeg, maybe getting Hellebuck would have worked better for them. But that's still kind of up in the air, and that's why you really can't poo-poo this deal for Florida, because Brady is probably the perfect piece as a playoff team for how he can impact the game for them, and they could probably pull the zero goalie strategy and grab someone with that defense there with Forsling, Ekblad, and Seth Jones still there. Like their D's still solid. So for Florida, I give an A-, and for Ottawa, I'm actually going to give them a B+, because yes, they weren't able to get any current player to be on their roster to play, but they're going to get a good player in the top 10. This draft is pretty decent in terms of depth. Like, yes, there's no superstar at the top end. I know Gavin McKenna, his stock's fallen a little bit compared to what it was a few years ago, but he's not, he's a winger. Same with, Ivor Stenberg. Florida probably would have ended up getting the D. They don't have time to sit there and have a guy develop for 3-4 years. They're trying to win now. So for them, it works. And for Ottawa, they can, see they have some assets to play with to try to see how they want to build their team. They still have good players in place, right? Like, it's not like that's changed. Now, the dynamic could shift, in the future. We can see that. Jake Sanderson also was part of Team USA. So he signed just a massive extension, not like that long ago, like an 8-year extension. Could he eventually want out? It's possible. I mean, some Canadian teams might be leery of drafting American players. Like I personally feel, and I've covered this before and probably cover again, that the Leafs should be active to move Matthews now while his value is high before he wants out anyways, and then you're not going to get much in return, as much as you could get now. So I think for Ottawa, based on everything they did well, and really in a way, I'm giving them, a B plus because they were active and were, willing to make the deal. But it could vary depending on what happens in the offseason. So, in a way, that's the grade, but it could be an unofficial B plus because by training camp, that team could look different, because it also depends if they just outright draft 3 players with those picks, or they move them to acquire some more, here and now NHLers that are ready to go. So either way, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll have some more information leading up to the draft, because I think we're going to have a very fun and exciting offseason in the NHL in terms of having a lot of trades, just with the free agent market being so weak. So check back when you can, and thanks for listening.